As we've been thinking about the landscape allocation question within the research group, and listening to some of the conversation that has gone on this morning about making sure that we have enough types of conditions distributed across the landscape to support future research efforts, as well as study designs that may require a sample of different existing conditions as kind of a substitute of space for time kind of thing, that we would need to have some diversity on the forest at some scale and using some measures of diversity. We've had a lot of debate and discussion about what's the appropriate measure of diversity. Is it at the stand scale, or is it at the sub-watershed scale, or is it at the forest scale? We've had a lot of discussions about what's the right measure in terms of the variable. Do we look at something very simple like young, medium, and old? Do we want to break that down into more detailed serial classes? Or do we want to look at other measures that might include other aspects of the landscape, like, I think I mentioned earlier, canopy closure or understory vegetation or habitat types or things like that. So, there's a lot of different directions we could go. What we're looking from you guys is maybe a little bit more specific responses than the more generalized discussion that we've had to date, or up until this point, about which measures you would recommend we go for, at what scale you recommend we go for, and if we're going to go for like a sub-watershed scale, what's the appropriate sub-watershed? Are we talking something at the 20-acre scale or something at the 200-acre scale? So, beginning with that in mind, I think I want to start. Can I toss it over to you to go through the key questions?
Sure.
And I'll take the notes?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Sure. What is the desirable extent of diversity of stand condition and/or seral conditions needed to support a strong research and demonstration program? The extent of the diversity of stand condition.
See, I have a variable here I'd like to get in the mix and thinking, because I think it's going to be key to making this actually work, is that question plus, and how do you put that in the context of the very large variety of stands we already have at Jackson?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. You want me to repeat the question?
It's either post-lunch or the question's not clear.
Can I try to reframe it maybe?
Yeah.
Let me do a check-in with the group. I thought there was emerging agreement about looking at a sub-watershed scale, something on the size of the Casper Creek studies, around plus or minus 500 acres as sort of the scale question, at least an initial look, and overlay that over the existing vegetation types, and then get an assessment of what that tells us in terms of looking for potential pairs, and then looking at the next step. So those would be the sequences that I thought we kind of all agreed was a first step. Is that, did I hear what I wanted to hear, or is that?
Third order watersheds, I think, is what kind of it.
So let's capture that. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I think we did. I just am checking. We captured it last night, and I think we anchored in the review this morning that that's a recommendation we would strongly give the group to start with.
So that would mean that the measures that we would use to manage diversity would be the same scale as the measures that we're using to manage the landscape.
No, that's just the first step, because the scales then depend on those questions, right? And that's what Kate was getting to. When you're looking at the watershed questions, it's the whole thing. when you're looking at different wildlife drivers, then it could be it could be pieces of a subwatershed, it could be several subwatersheds, but you need that information first, and then your research questions will tell you what scale.
That's the key right there.
Right.
The research question is going to tell
I
you.
kind of
the scale.
concluded you needed to free the landscape scale questions from such a rigid size thing for the subwatershed, because, you know, if you do the calculation, if they're 500, there's only 60 units like that in there. That's already going to narrow you down, and if you have to have replication. So a more fluid approach might be helpful from the science side.
The thing we might be able to help with, maybe, is if, I mean, where I won't speak of it, if I knew how those, you know, subwatersheds fell out, what that 50 to 60 looked like, and the diversity within them, then we might be able to start looking at which ones might you want to think of retaining as potential pairs, and then talk about how you would maintain them, getting back to the consistent treatment in the data. But without having that snapshot, I don't know how we can do that.
Okay, let me back up. Perhaps we threw the scale question in too quickly. Ignoring scale for the moment. What's the appropriate measure for measuring diversity on the scale of the forest? If we want to ensure that we have enough diversity to achieve certain objectives, what might we select to actually measure to demonstrate that we're achieving
I
those?
think you're going to have to work around that question a little bit, because any different resource has different metrics. I mean, just like Kim was saying, if you're doing a osprey survey, it's very, very different than doing a herpetology survey. So I think you really have to define what are your research questions prior to determining what metrics you can use.
And I think your inventory will tell you what kind of diversity you have, and then you kind of go from there. I mean, you can't create diversity that's not there. What you're looking to do is try to document what's there and use that to, you know, on the project scale to define your diversity. I don't think defining diversity is not necessarily a goal that you need to do.